roughly half the production cost and difficulty of our Model 3. We built the Tesla management team over 20 years, getting to the point where we're close to having the total expenditures for the company, excluding debt, roughly equal to the debt.
Okay. Cash flow break-even.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think we'll be there in Q2.
In Q2.
Elon Musk was just interviewed at Morgan Stanley conference. This one, I would say, is worth watching if you are a Tesla stock investor, especially because Elon also gave an update or more insights, not about just a next generation platform, but also Twitter. And that is important to us Tesla stock investors because if Elon is not able to get Twitter under control and be profitable, then he will sell more Tesla stock. But I think he gave a very clear indication of how Twitter is going and whether Elon will sell more Tesla stock, specifically to finance Twitter, not for any other reason. He may sell Tesla stock for some other reason. I'm talking about Twitter specifically. And let's dive in by starting with Tesla first.
Your next phase of vertical integration, the relentless first principles thinking on vehicle design, battery design, factory optimization, at the same time as the vehicle, that could lead to a target, I guess, of this, 50% step change in cost when the new gen eventually comes around. Can you just take us through the quick summary of that, and it unlocks the next wave of the TAM because there's price elasticity is what you were sharing on this subject as the second big takeaway for Tesla?
Yeah, I mean, there's a clear path to making a smaller vehicle that is roughly half the production cost and difficulty of our Model 3.
I like that exact wording. There is a clear path towards reducing the cost by 50%. Very confident.
That vehicle will be, really used almost entirely in autonomous mode. The thing that is really gigantic for Tesla is autonomy. And if people have used the Tesla full self-driving and have seen how rapidly the full self-driving capability has been evolving, it should be obvious that is by far the most profound thing.
I have FSD personally, and yeah, I agree. It is quite stunning to get in the car and then the car drives itself. Still, I think there's quite a bit of time before we solve full self-driving, but every month, every quarter, every year, we are getting a lot closer to it being solved. And eventually, I believe it will happen sometime before the end of 2030. Hopefully, much faster than that.
There's the sort of total addressable market stuff. It's like, guys, this is like actually not the right way to think about it. It's like passenger vehicles right now only see about 10 to 12 hours of use per week. There's 168 hours in a week. If those vehicles are autonomous, they're probably going to get used for 50 or 60 hours a week. That's a 5x increase in the value of a car, and it costs the same to make the car. At that point, you basically have software margins in a hardware product. It's insane. Total addressable market is everyone, all humans.
So it appears to me that Elon is still sticking with full self-driving just like before, although at the investor day, the management hinted at multiple variants. And they sort of implied that there would be models that would not be just robotaxis. But what Elon is saying here is a little bit of the opposite. He is still fully convinced that this is basically going to be a robotaxi. So how is that next vehicle going to look like is a big question. Will it look more like a smaller Model 3, or will it be a complete redesign and it will look like a mini bus sort of thing? Either way, it appears that we will find out in maybe about 3 months. A Mexican official said that Tesla will reveal what vehicles it will produce in the factory that will be built in Mexico once the factory breaks ground, which is probably about 3 months from now. And now let's switch gears to Twitter. I won't interrupt anymore from here just to keep this video a reasonable length, but it's pretty good if you are concerned about how Twitter is doing and will Elon have to sell more Tesla stock later. Let's take a listen.
The vision you're building towards, I think you've called it X or the Everything app.
Yeah.
Tell us about it. Beyond just improving the advertising and what will we be able to do on Twitter in your grandest vision?
Yeah, so X.com is, so I think it's possible to create a very powerful finance experience, basically. Kind of, like PayPal is kind of like a halfway version of what I think could be done in payments and finance. And so you want to be, like, let's say, you want to be able to send money easily from one account on X/Twitter to another account effortlessly with one click. You want to be able to, I think, earn interest on the money. You want to be able to have debt, so your interest can go negative. Basically, I think it's possible to become the biggest financial institution in the world. So just by providing people with convenient payment options, we don't have the time to go into it in detail here, except if we just make the app more and more useful, people will use it more, and it'll be great. So you'll see.
Okay. We're still on Twitter for a moment, but we had, in Austin, thank you for hosting, at the Investor Day, and you showcased 16 executives on stage at various times with you, an incredibly deep and built-out management team. And I think the executive team with you at Twitter, is perhaps a bit leaner. Maybe there's a media narrative here that's accurate. So
look, he does have a black turtleneck as well.
So
do you need anything more? I don't think so.
So when does the Twitter management team have that bench like you showcased at the Gigafactory?
Well, I think it takes a long time to build a strong management team. And we built the Tesla management team over 20 years. I think Twitter is an easier problem than Tesla by a long shot. But it'll take some time to build the team, and I don't know, probably a few years.
Okay. Performance-based advertising has been very lucrative for other companies and can be made more relevant on a more narrowcast basis, if you will, than pure brand advertising. So when do you introduce performance-based advertising and scale it?
We introduced from the moment the acquisition closed. Like, we have to have performance-based advertising is really just advertising that is relevant.
Relevant.
In fact, we should really have aspirationally zero non-performance-based advertising. We want advertising that matters. People's attention is precious. We should not serve them ads that are annoying or irrelevant or strident or ugly. And it's interesting you mentioned White Lotus. I actually was talking to David Zaslav, who's great, and he was like, hey, why can't we put a White Lotus trailer every time someone mentions White Lotus on Twitter? I'm like, absolutely. So, like, one of the super obvious but profound things that we're doing is enabling keyword advertising so that you can enter the keywords and like White Lotus, and if somebody mentions White Lotus, you put the White Lotus trailer there. I mean, this sounds very obvious.
You don't need GPT-3 for this.
We don't need advanced AI for this one. It's sort of just Google AdWords, but applied to tweets and the home timeline and replies and everywhere else. Because you'll often have very sort of long, deep conversations, people going on, talking about movies, TV, products, and whatnot, and that's the perfect opportunity for advertisers to provide their message. if I think about something, for example, like Starlink, which does advertise in various media, for Starlink, would want to advertise to users in regions that are not already saturated. So Starlink tends to be saturated in urban areas, but is not saturated in rural areas. And so what Starlink would like to do is like to say, please show the ad to rural users with a slow connection. And then the simple message is, do you want faster internet for less money? Click. Probably you do. And Twitter needs to be able to do a simple thing like that, and it will be. And in fact, it is already able to do that. We just haven't fully rolled it out. So we're I think around 20%-ish, but by the end of this year, almost all advertising should be reasonably relevant.
And that your Starlink example comes back to your disposable income, if you want to, or the education level and the ability to buy and afford the Starlink subscription of the Twitter user. Like it also dovetails back into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also an opportunity here to have advertising be much really improve the relevance of advertising using AI in the sense that based on what tweets somebody views, likes, and whatever, you can actually populate a parameter space, an ML parameter space, and then you can take an ad, and even if you say nothing about that ad, after it's dropped in the Twitter system and it has 10,000 views, you populate a parameter space of the ad, and then you correlate the user parameter space and the ad parameter space, and then you don't need to do any demographic targeting, because you could be like, say it's a gardening ad. Well, you could be 20, 30, 40, you could be 70 years old, any sex, whatever, it doesn't matter. What matters is you like gardening. And that's the ad that should be shown. And so I think we can get away from a lot of the sort of targeting by age range and sex and whatever in favor of targeting by interest. And a lot of these sort of demographic targeting was done coming from a TV or newspaper era where you don't have interaction with the user. You just have to kind of guess, because it's a one-way street in TV. But on Twitter, it's not a one-way street. There's continuous interaction. So I think we can just have a profoundly more useful advertising experience. So it's quite difficult to keep this thing running, and then also difficult to advance the product because it is really overly complex, to say the least. And we'll make a change, what appears to be a small change somewhere, that then causes a massive disruption. For example, just yesterday, we made what we thought was a small change, and we'll put out we want to be in the sort of full disclosure of everything, including gruesome details. But essentially there was what was supposed to be a small change to 1% of the Twitter user base ended up being a catastrophic change to 100% of the Twitter user base. We don't have enough time to go into the details, but there was a Boolean flag in the Twitter front end that should not have been there, we fixed that. But let me give you like a silly example. At one point, there was a problem with Twitter Spaces where suspended users were able to join conversations even though they were suspended, and we temporarily turned off access to Twitter Spaces, which then made anyone who is using the Twitter Android app unable to like tweets. Now, how those things are connected is not clear. So if you were
In the Rube Goldberg, fractally.
That's what I'm saying. So if you had an iOS app, you could like tweets. If you were on the web app, you could like tweets, but not if you had an Android app because of spaces. And you're like, what? So one of the things we're doing, there's a lot of work behind the scenes in simplifying the code base, getting rid of extraneous features, and enabling Twitter to evolve more rapidly in the future. But it requires a lot of cleanup, essentially. Yeah.
So, you've grown users despite this lean engineering team and the code base being unwieldy, and cloud spend 40% down, cut out a data center. Mm-hmm. Is this due to the strength of the engineering team that you've been able to achieve this and introduce subscription and other features while trying to hold it all together? And where does that engineering team go to accomplish both the code base enhancements and all the features you've said you want to introduce?
Yeah, I mean, I think on balance we're doing okay because, and just to give you a sense of where things were at the close of acquisition on, say, October 29th, Twitter was tracking to a negative $3 billion a year burn rate, and had $1 billion in the bank. So that's a pretty dire situation. If 2023 had been a normal year, Twitter would have done something on the order of $4.5 billion in revenue, $4.5 billion in cost, roughly break even. But when you add $1.5 billion of debt servicing to that, and a massive decline in advertising, some of it's cyclic, some of it political, but call it at least a 50% decline in revenue, roughly a 50% decline in revenue. You've got over $3 billion negative. Now, Twitter has some revenue that's not advertising based, so
data services.
Exactly. Data subscriptions and whatnot. But it was in the absence of action, Twitter would have had $6 billion in cost and $3 billion in revenue, so minus $3 billion, and with $1 billion in the bank. So it would have gone bankrupt in 4 months. So immediate and drastic action had to be taken, which was. And so we actually have now cut the burn to the non-interest burn to roughly $1.5 billion. So we've got $1.5 billion of debt servicing and $1.5 billion of expenditures. We went from 3 data centers to 2, and reduced our cloud expenditures significantly, and while at the same time having the fastest product evolution in Twitter's history. So overall, not bad. There've been a few bumps along the road, obviously, but this is to be expected. And now I think we have the opportunity to grow it into something quite spectacular. We have the highest total user minutes in Twitter history. So the real number to care about is actually not the MDAU monthly, which is theoretically monetizable daily active users, but it's user time. How many total user hours per day do you have? That's the real figure of merit, because one could, for example, say go to 300 million daily active users, but if they spent less time on the system cumulatively, that would actually be a downgrade. It's how much human attention are you worth? And that's where I think, like I said, that the really profound thing is what Twitter has is roughly 130 million hours of the smartest, most influential people on Earth every single day. There's nothing else that has that. I mean, there are social networks that have more users, but they do not have the smart, influential people. They don't have you.
So if I do the math on what you've said about the advertiser pause and revenue decline and the cost changes, it's EBITDA profitable today, and then you're looking for cash flow break even after debt service.
Well, it's EBITDA profitable, but the D in the EBITDA is quite big.
The D is big. Right. When do you get to cash flow break even with the D? When do you get to cash flow break even after that D?
This is where we need to focus on the E part.
Yes.
I hope we pay taxes.
And the T.
Yeah. So, like I said, I mean, we're getting to the point where we're close to having the total expenditures for the company, excluding debt, roughly equal to the debt.
Okay. Cash flow break even.
Yeah, that's what I think. Like, I think we'll be there in Q2.
In Q2.
And then, like, I definitely don't want to count chickens before they hatch or jinx it or anything. But I think we've got a shot at being cash flow positive next quarter in Q2.
Okay. So some of that'll depend on advertisers. So we'll talk quickly about advertising. You've mentioned it a few times. The value is clear: 147 billion impressions on Twitter of World Cup 22, and 50% year-over-year growth in NFL video views. 39% increase in Super Bowl mentions. The NFL putting out engagements never been higher. And then WPP's CEO, Mark Reed, said 10 days or however long ago this was, February 24, Twitter seems to be more stable, and I think advertising clients presumably here, will look about coming back to Twitter. So are you in touch with agency and CMOs, and is this the theme? I think we just saw McDonald's or others coming back as they realize you are absolutely focused on the things you were said not to be focused on in terms of brand safety, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think really what I'd say to advertisers and brands is, use Twitter yourself and believe what you see on Twitter, not what you read in the newspapers. Because what you see on Twitter is the real thing, and what you read in newspapers is not. I'd like to thank Mark Reed and WPP for their support, and Publicis and others, and for the advertisers that have stuck with us, like Disney and Apple. Thank you.
So let's switch gears to SpaceX, hitting first Starlink. What can you tell us about Starlink and the scale and deployment and how that's going?
Yeah, the Starlink team is doing an amazing job. More than half of all satellites in orbit right now are Starlink satellites. So if you add up all satellites launched cumulatively, they are less than Starlink. So Starlink is currently providing global connectivity. You can get connectivity anywhere on Earth, from the most remote part of Antarctica to San Francisco, anywhere. It's full global connectivity, high bandwidth, and low latency. The latency is important because unless you're in low Earth orbit, you cannot get low latency. The geostationary satellites are up, very, very high. You've sort of got sometimes up to a second of latency from a geostationary satellite, all things inclusive. Whereas with Starlink satellites, we believe we can get the latency under 20 milliseconds. And in fact, for international communications, an interesting thing is that in fiber, light travels much slower than in aero vacuum. So in rough approximation, light travels about 300 kilometers per millisecond in air and vacuum, but only just roughly over 200 kilometers per millisecond in fiber. So you've got like a sort of roughly 40% increase in speed of light going through the Starlink system than through fiber, and it can also follow a more direct route instead of following the sort of coastline of the continents. It can actually have a more direct route. So it's a shorter route and inherently faster from a physics standpoint. So it connects the world way better than fiber. And it will provide, and is providing, connectivity to people that either never had it before or where their options were extremely expensive or very low bandwidth. So it's helping out a lot of communities that never had access, especially when you consider that education is digital these days. That's really how you can learn anything. You can basically learn anything. You can basically learn anything for free on the internet if you have the internet. So in terms of providing education abilities to remote communities, Starlink is doing a lot of good in that regard.
Lastly, the launch, whether Falcon 9 Heavy or Starship, I think you had the static fire test that went well, and what can you tell us about the next phase on launch for Starship?
Yeah, so we're getting ready for the first launch of Starship. This is a very difficult program. The rocket is roughly 2.5 times the thrust of a Saturn V. So if or once it reaches orbit, it'll be by far the biggest rocket to reach orbit. But more importantly, it is designed to be the first fully reusable rocket, orbital rocket ever. So the key to extending life beyond Earth is a fully and rapidly reusable orbital rocket. This is a very hard problem given the constraints of Earth. Earth has a thick atmosphere and strong gravity. It is only barely possible to do this. That is why it has not been done before. But we're getting close for our first orbital attempt of Starship. Hopefully in the next month or so, we'll have our first attempt. I'm not saying it'll get to orbit, but I am guaranteeing excitement. So it won't be boring. I think it's got, I don't know, hopefully above 50% chance of reaching orbit. And then we're building a whole series of Starships in South Texas. And so I think we've got, hopefully about an 80% chance of reaching orbit this year. It'll probably take us a couple more years to achieve full and rapid reusability, which I can't emphasize enough it is the profound breakthrough that is needed to extend life beyond Earth, because it lowers the cost of access to space by orders of magnitude. In the same way that if let's say there were no airplanes that were reusable, how expensive would air flight be? It would be insane. You'd have to buy a new airplane every time you flew somewhere, and you have to tow a small airplane behind you for the return flight. So, that's just not going to scale. So assuming things go well there, this vehicle it could make life multiplanetary. That's a really big deal. It could make life on Mars real. And I think that's one of the great filters that any civilization has to pass through, which is, does the civilization become multiplanetary or not? This is one of the elements of the Fermi paradox. I sort of wonder that if we are able to get to multiplanetary, that'll be a forcing function for ultimately improving spaceflight to become multistellar, to go to other star systems. And I think we may discover that there are many long-dead one-planet civilizations. We don't want to be one of those. We don't want to be one of those lame one-planet civilizations. Please.
I think we're going to wrap on that. Thank you, Elon Musk.
All right, thanks. Yeah.
And switching gears, you shared Master Plan 3 at the Gigafactory, and the edit that came to my mind was Master Planet after your first piece there on sustainable energy for all of Earth. Can you take us through that positive, optimistic, mathematically underpinned vision for our planet? Okay,
there's not a lot of time to do that, but I guess the overall message is that we can absolutely make Earth, turn Earth into a sustainable energy economy, fully sustainable, using lithium-ion batteries, solar, wind, as well as geothermal, nuclear, and other things. But primarily, it'll be solar and wind, and lithium-ion batteries. And our calculation is you need roughly 240 terawatt-hours of lithium-ion batteries. Most of those will be iron phosphate lithium, of the iron phosphate variety. In other words, with a primarily iron cathode, which is a plentiful material. In fact, Earth is the number one element on Earth is actually iron. A little factoid. I think Earth by mass is about 32% iron and about 30% oxygen, and then everything else is miscellaneous. So we're like a muddy rust ball. So plenty of iron. Basically, the materials needed for to make 240 terawatt-hours of batteries are actually plentiful on Earth. We don't need to mow down the Amazon or anything like that. We don't need to basically do anything terrible to the environment to create 240 terawatt-hours of batteries. In fact, there will be less mining required in a sustainable energy economy than is currently required. Really, this is a message of hope and optimism grounded in physical reality. It is not wishful thinking. So we should be excited and inspired about the future. And I'm not suggesting complacency or anything like that, or that we should, and getting there faster is better than getting there slower. But what we don't need to live some terrible austere life and give up the things that we like. You can have the things that you like, in fact, even more of them, and the environment can be good. All the good things are possible, is what I'm saying. We should be excited and optimistic about the future. We need to go build it. It's a lot of work, but you should not feel sad about the future regarding sustainable energy. It will happen. We just want to make it happen faster rather than slower.
And this is the Tesla stock buying opportunity explained by Elon Musk. My name is Matt Posius. Like and subscribe if you haven't yet. And I'll see you in the next video. If you would like to support the channel, the Patreon link is down below. Thank you so much.